I've been growing more and more produce in fabric planters, and the results have me convinced that this is a trend that won't be contained. If you're looking to experiment in the garden, you can try to grow potatoes in a bag. This process for how to grow a bag of potatoes is accessible for sunny balconies, decks, small gardens, or if you simply run out of planting space. What's up everyone, it's Scott from New Garden Road, always out here to inform, inspire, and elevate you. Encouraging biodiversity and restoring habitat is my mission, one garden at a time. In Central Texas, we plant our potatoes in early February, and they're ready for harvest about 90 days later, typically in the month of May. And we can also try planting them in late August for a fall harvest. I've chosen to grow mine in a fabric planter from Smart Pot, and I also have one from Hacksnicks. But you could also go with a clay terracotta pot, something ceramic, plastic. Last season I grew some in a burlap sack from my favorite local coffee roaster. Shout out to Texas Coffee Traders. If you want to plant them like I have here, you want to pick something that's at least 10 gallons in size. All of these fabric planters that I'm using have a circumference of roughly 12 to 15 inches, and I like to plant 4 potatoes per square foot at 6-inch spacing. Now that is planting potatoes pretty close together, but I'll come back around on that one. It's also vital that you choose the right growing medium. A loose or well-draining potting mix is essential. You could use something like the Ocean Forest potting mix from Fox Farm, or you could do something like I did here, which was I reused potting soil from previous grows. I simply added about 1/3 of fresh potting mix and then an organic slow release fertilizer. Choosing a fertilizer higher in nitrogen is important because these potatoes aren't truly root crops, they're actually enlarged stems, and nitrogen is the key ingredient in helping them to size up. Oftentimes if you're looking for methods for growing potatoes, you're going to hear terms like dirt up, earth up. Potatoes will form where you initially set them, and then as you dirt them up, that plant's going to send out more shoots, form more tubers, dirt it up some more. The same thing is happening. You get some larger, more mature potatoes, and then as it goes up, they may be a little bit smaller depending on when you harvest. But that's the idea behind dirting them up. Well, alternately, you could completely fill your container from the get-go. They will find their way even if you bury them deeply. I did dirt these up. The thing about growing potatoes here in Central Texas is sometimes we find that the season is not adequately long enough to allow for the new potatoes to size up. So you really kind of have an intense growing season that's fairly short-lived. That's why I don't really put a whole lot of emphasis on dirting them up. I will do it in some fashion, however. Essentially, I plant my potatoes in about 6 inches of soil, and then when they get about 6 inches tall, I'll dirt them up and add a whole other layer of potting soil and some granular fertilizer at that point. Now, depending on where you're growing your potatoes, what part of the world you're in, this could vary, so experiment for yourself. If you're in Louisiana or something like that, you're probably going to have a great time growing potatoes throughout a long, ideal growing season. Here are some additional points for care and cultivation of your potatoes. Make sure you mulch the top of your containers. I really like pine straw or pine needles, but you could also use some shredded leaves. It's important that you put mulch on your potatoes, whether they're in ground or in containers. One of the benefits is that you help to retain soil moisture, which is really important. It will also keep out weeds, keep weeds from taking hold and stealing nutrients from your plant. It will also protect the soil microbiome, all the life in the soil that you want to foster to grow healthy, resilient crops. Also, in the case of potatoes, as they start to form, a lot of times they'll poke out of the soil if you don't have mulch, and they start to surface in that manner and they get exposed to sun. They will begin to turn green, which is indicating that they're producing more solanine, which is not what you want to consume. That can make you sick if you eat too much of it. So mulching along with dirting up will help to mitigate that, and those are the benefits. Choose an area with good sun exposure in the way of 6 to 8 hours of full sun. I will say in my Central Texas garden, I like to put them in a spot where they get some afternoon shade. That way, as we get deeper into the season, they're not getting some of that really hot afternoon, and that helps to really extend their growth and keeps them a little bit less stressed. Not too long after you get your potatoes going, you may start to notice some flowers. Now, this is a really good indication that the tubers are beginning to size up. And this brings us to an important point in their development when you need to provide consistent moisture. You don't want that potting mix to get bone dry. That could stunt their growth. And on the opposite side, you don't want it to be soggy and sopping wet either, because that could cause them to start rotting. You want to go for a nice, even, consistent moisture. I always recommend just taking the tip of your finger and stick it in the top of that soil. If it feels moist, You can let it dry out another day, but check it again the next day, and if it's dry at the tip of your finger, then you want to give it a nice slow soaking. And this is also a great time to give them another side dressing with a granular fertilizer, or even a liquid drench of something like the Holy Mackerel. That one's got a lot of nitrogen in it. It's a 310, and that would be perfect for feeding your potatoes on a quick feed. Maybe give that to them for a few weeks, once a week, and that's really going to fuel their growth and development. As the tubers begin to mature and they start to slow on their growth and development, you're going to notice the tops of those plants will start to turn yellow and brown. They're going to look like they're dying because they are essentially. The whole process of the potatoes is completing. So don't be in a panic. Your potatoes are almost ready for harvest. Now I'm going to give you some notes on harvesting and curing your potatoes. If you want to keep these potatoes for a period of time, or if you've grown a lot and you just really can't eat them all at once, you're going to want to store them. So the important thing, the goal of harvesting and curing them would be to allow those skins to harden off, and that will help them store better and keep them from rotting. The first thing I do once I notice the tops of the potato plants begin to yellow is I will maybe give them one more drench of water, and that's going to be the last one. You want to let it dry out for a period of 6 to 8 days at that point. And if you're expecting some rain, keep your eye on the weather forecast. This is really essential, especially here in Central Texas. During the month of May, we get a lot of rain. It's our rainiest month. You want to make sure you cover them or protect them from any drenching rain if you're getting ready to harvest them. When the time comes, you want to handle your potatoes like eggs. Be gentle. If you get in there and you really get a grip on them, sometimes your thumb will slip and break some of that skin. That can heal over just fine in time. However, it could also make them more predisposed to some fungal issues, some rot, and that will make them less likely to store as well. You know, you'll see people who will flip over their containers of potatoes when they go to harvest them. I just don't do that because it makes a mess. You know, I'm growing these in an area where I'm keeping it tidy. You can just flip them over on a tarp or some cardboard. Another thing I want to talk about is the spacing. In square foot gardening, you can plant your potatoes 4 per square foot, which is equivalent to spacing them 6 inches apart. A lot of times you'll get the recommendation to plant your potatoes 8 to 12 inches apart. So I think what you might get in planting them closer together is overall smaller potatoes versus if you planted 1 per square foot and gave the plant more space, gave the tubers more room, less competition, you may end up getting more uniform, larger tubers. But you can see here, I still got some good sized ones. I do want to mention that you can save some of your potatoes for a fall planting. If you can do that in your growing region like I can, you want to take probably some of the best potatoes that you've got in your harvest. I'm going to try and do something that I saw from another YouTube creator, Self-Sufficient Me, and when he harvested his potatoes, he took some and put them back in a potting mix in a box essentially, and he labeled the box, he closed it up, and he put them in his shed. I've noticed over time that some of the potatoes that I held back and maybe just didn't use, or they were curing, maybe I forgot about them, they would last and they would begin to sprout late summer, and oftentimes I would plant those. But I never thought about putting them in a potting mix, which makes sense. Kind of like potatoes that are still in the ground after you harvest. This has happened to me in the past. I missed some, and lo and behold, at the end of summer, I'll get some potatoes sprouting up. They're gonna have a little bit more ideal storage, and I think it could improve their integrity overall and make them more conducive to transitioning from that environment to growing out again in the fall. I also want to drop in some cool weather considerations, because if you're planting your potatoes for a fall harvest, that may be bumping up to your first frost. Some key things that you need to understand is that potatoes growing in the ground are hardy to about 28 degrees. That means when those ambient temperatures drop down to those upper 20s, your potatoes in the ground are probably going to be okay. I will say if you're growing them in containers, you might want to err on the side of caution. Take your wheelbarrow or a dolly or something like that and move them into a protected environment, or cover them with some row cover, because in that case they're generally more exposed to air. That's the key element of how these fabric pots work, to air-prune roots. The top growth, however, is much less hardy, so if you get a light frost, you're probably going to see some damage on the top growth of your potato plants. If you're growing your potatoes in containers or grow bags, they're more exposed to wind chills, so just be ready to take some action. We're probably going to get serenaded by the ice cream truck with a ton of mosquitoes flying around. You can try, maybe I should light a candle or something. How we doing? Now check out more awesome gardening videos on my channel, like this video, and follow New Garden Road for weekly content. You can grow your own bag of potatoes and keep it organic.